The information is lost. I heard a stunning woman at the adjacent table mumble those things as I was unwinding in a cafe. I had just lost my job the day before for trying to hide an error that one of my coworkers had made. I therefore completely understood the fear and helplessness that accompany making a mistake. I volunteered to assist her as a former engineer, and I promptly recovered her lost data. My life completely changed as a result of the woman and I connecting over our extended conversation about my colleague Joseph. George is my name. I am 46 years old and currently employed with Reynolds Corporation as the assistant manager of the engineering division. It's been 16 years since I began this work at 30 after changing careers. Time goes by so quickly. My 3-year-old colleague Joseph Taylor has also begun to receive mentions for promotion. Since there is no seniority system in place at our organization, advancement through the ranks is based on ability rather than seniority. Joseph is younger than me, yet he's tremendously intelligent and successful in all he does. Our organization is in the food and beverage sector, and throughout the years, we have worked on a wide range of projects. To be honest, I work a lot of overtime, and occasionally I get unexpected calls after work to attend client meetings. It's an extremely demanding work because of all the overtime. Nevertheless, the salary is far higher than what most people my age make, which is why I've continued in this position. Despite spending a significant amount of money on my several interests on my days off, I still manage to save a good amount. I've been putting money down for my wedding day, but maybe I should give up on it now that I'm 46. It's all I've been thinking about lately. Something transpired that made me feel even more hopeless while I struggled with these ideas. My coworker Joseph approached me for guidance not long after I turned 46. "George, could we have a quick chat?" "What's going on? You appear serious." Well, this time, I truly went wrong. The project in which errors are not permitted. At that point, Joseph started admitting he had made a grave error. In fact, we've been working on a project at Reynolds Corporation lately that is larger than anything we've ever worked on. In the engineering department, Joseph and I are mostly in charge of implementing the client's requests for system enhancements and revisions. On this large project, Joseph is the main lead, and I have been assigned to help him. Normally, I don't have to become too involved because it's Joseph's responsibility, but based on the look on his face, I may need to intervene more than I had anticipated. I realized there was a mistake after delivering it already. Why don't you inform the client and ask them to return it in such scenario? They most likely won't be overly angry. That's the main issue. By mistake, I ended up sending the system to a different client. I was unable to speak. It was astounding to me that Joseph had made such a simple error. He added that it was sent to a whole other company. The client had apparently been phoning Joseph nonstop and had already seen the new system intended for someone else. Pretending to be too busy, Joseph had been evading the calls, but they were also sending emails requesting an explanation. How am I going to proceed? I'm going to have my 3rd child soon. If this causes me to lose my job, it will be all right. You shouldn't have to worry too much, in my opinion. They'll understand if you really apologize. However, the client is already enraged. Joseph never skips a work check, thus he rarely makes a thoughtless error like this. See, I'll assist you in saying sorry. For now, let's just keep our cool. Yes, you are correct. I shall take that action. Before expressing our regret to the client the following day, Joseph and I made the decision to inform our department manager of the circumstances. When we report this, what do you think the manager will say? He will undoubtedly be enraged. The manager unexpectedly approached Joseph and me as we were ready to go apologize first thing in the morning and said something startling. This time, you really did it. Pardon me? No, George, not you. Will you not offer an apology? The manager seemed to be taking his ire at me, the assistant, for some reason. I should have known at this point that this was a trap meant to drag me down. I apologize. I've heard you made a mistake when attempting to take credit for Joseph. Are you serious? What is the intended meaning of that? The manager claimed that someone had informed him that I was the one who committed the error, and that, in addition, I had purportedly pilfered Joseph's idea in order to claim credit for it and increase my own prospects of advancement. I could never do something like that. As his assistant, all I can say is that I didn't double-check anything. So you're attempting to blame Joseph for the error? There is miscommunication there. I knew that I was being put up as the antagonist, even though I had no understanding why this was occurring. Manager, who shared that information with you? It arrived this morning in an anonymous email. That is undoubtedly false. Why do you think that? Joseph tried to defend me right away after learning I was being blamed, but the manager said something that made us both froze. It doesn't matter who is at fault. This error cannot be excused. Both of you ought to get ready for the prospect of being fired. Death. Obviously. The cuss Georger has already complained to us. The manager left after saying that. How should I respond to being fired? How can I tell my family about it? Joseph, I couldn't help but remark, you can just say I made the mistake this time, as I saw Joseph's dejected expression and considered his family. How come? However, I'm not dating. It's okay, I have no one to protect. That's accurate. I should be able to handle getting fired because I'm single. However, if Joseph lost his work at this very moment, he would be in big danger. Since we started working for the same company, we have been coworkers, therefore I am aware of his excellent character. I reasoned that it would be preferable for me to accept responsibility and let Joseph to continue working. Many thanks. I have one to give you. I'll always be grateful for what you've done for me. It's all right. In any case, I've been itching to try out other types of work. You're really a nice guy. I went straight to the manager after that and gave him the rundown. I informed him that Joseph had nothing to do with anything, and that I was the one who was at fault. I'm really sorry. So, you were attempting to get out of this by lying? Huh. I'm unable to forgive that. I really apologize. I'm just able to apologize. I can't conceive of a more noble course of action if I'm being fired for standing up for my buddy Joseph. So, I'm okay with nearly certain dismissal. But then I was confronted with a hard reality. You know, you're simply too great of a guy. What's making you laugh? The manager reprimanded me, and as soon as I got back to my station, Joseph approached me with a chuckle before dropping a bombshell. Do you honestly believe I would make such a mistake? I sent the client the incorrect system on purpose. What? By what do you mean? Describe yourself. Remember when we spoke about a promotion? It seemed to be between you and me. I was shocked to learn that Joseph had plotted to undermine me in order to secure his promotion. It was okay if I took the fall for him. But he meant to continue delivering false reports about me to the management in secret if things didn't work out. Why would you act in such a way? You've been my ally forever. And just like that, Joseph, someone I considered to be a personal friend and comrade, betrayed me. The manager wouldn't listen to me when I tried to explain the matter to him. There's no point in coming in Georgiou. I'm fired, he informed me. With a heavy heart, I packed up my belongings and left for home that day. I awoke the following day in the afternoon. There would be no room for me at work, even if I got there. Nobody had called in from the office by now. Rather, the manager sent me an official email terminating my employment. Overwhelmed by an unfathomable sensation, I discovered that I was walking towards a neighboring cafe. I settled into a table outside and ordered a sandwich and coffee. I sipped the coffee, but I was unable to get myself to finish the sandwich. I had no hunger, and I never anticipated to be betrayed by someone I trusted. What am I going to do now? A woman seated next to me whispered something quietly while I was buried in contemplation. My data is gone. I turned to see an incredibly attractive woman seated there. The woman was glancing at her phone, obviously nervous, trying to figure out what to do. I used to be an engineer, so I think I can help restore it. Are you serious? Would you kindly have a look? Obviously. Fixing this should be simple. And with that, I was assisting the helpless woman. I really appreciate it. I had an appointment with a client soon, so I was really freaking out. No issue. I'm happy I was of assistance. A business meeting? Indeed. Jennifer is my name. My place of employment is Florence Corporation. Jennifer gave me her business card as she was saying that. Jennifer's father happens to be the CEO of the company where she works. Like me, she's 40 years old and unmarried. The daughter of a CEO. It makes sense that you have such refined manners. It is embarrassing. Don't say that, please. What is your name, by the way? My name is George. In actuality, I lost my job yesterday. Jennifer's surprised eyes grew wide. I couldn't help myself, even though I shouldn't have discussed it with a complete stranger. Burned? Why not? To put it simply, I was betrayed by a colleague I was close to. That is terrible. Well, I have to leave now. Next time, please tell me more. Jennifer quickly left the cafe after shutting her laptop. I stayed home all week, spending my days by myself. I knew I ought to be looking for work, but I was too tired. I'd assumed I'd live off my funds for the time being while I took some time to heal both physically and mentally. I was kicking back in bed when I received a call from an unknown number. Are you still here? The woman you met at the cafe is Jennifer. Jennifer, what's going on? Actually, there's something I'd really like to talk to you about. I had given Jennifer my phone when she gave me her business card, but I never thought she would be the one to get in touch. We set up a meeting in the same cafe where we first spoke because she indicated she would rather speak with someone in person than over the phone. Sorry for calling you out of the blue like this. No issue. How may I help you today? Well, if you haven't found a new job yet, would you consider working for us? I was shocked to learn that Jennifer wanted to hire me since her company needed engineers. I'd be hired immediately if I agreed, since her father, the CEO, had already given her the go-ahead. But I've never even met your father. When I told him about how you helped me, he said yes immediately. After giving it some thinking, I ultimately chose to accept Jennifer's offer. It was 2 months later. I continued to be busy, and I had almost forgotten about the episode involving Joseph. But then I got a call from Joseph out of the blue. Hey, a long time has passed. How are you doing? I'm doing quite well. Why are you phoning me? I just wanted to see how you were doing. Have you started a new job yet? Joseph had obviously called out of spite. Sorry to disappoint you, but I found a new job pretty quickly and have already started working. Oh, I see. Where do you currently work? At Florence Corporation. You know it well, right? Joseph remained silent. It made sense that he appeared to be at a loss for words. Joseph had often expressed his desire to work for Florence Corporation. Furthermore, he works for Reynolds Corporation, which is its parent firm. You're saying that Florence Corporation hired you? Give up tinkering around. That is accurate. There's going to be a workplace get-together shortly, right? There, I'm confident we'll cross paths. Be truthful. Are you not just bluffing as well? It seems that he believed me to be lying about my employment with the main corporation. After persistently disputing my statements, Joseph finally hung up on me. The meeting between the parent business and the subsidiary was held 2 weeks later. Joseph approached me with a smug smile as soon as I got there. You know, this place is off limits to outsiders. Oh, I see. Do you work as staff for events? What topic are you discussing? I informed you that Florence Corporation is where I work. Please, quit telling falsehoods. It's awkward. Joseph seemed to believe that I was assuming the role of event staff, when in reality, I was not. I realized that further denying it would not make him reconsider at this point. As I was contemplating that, I noticed Jennifer off in the distance. Is that Jennifer? IRL. She is even more gorgeous. George, you've arrived already. How come? Jennifer is someone I know. It was obvious that Joseph was anxious to see the CEO's daughter speaking to me. At last, he began to understand that I was speaking the truth regarding my employment at Florence Corporation. I told you that Florence Corporation is where I work. Not at all. You truly, who is this person, George? After Jennifer gave us a perplexed look, I introduced Joseph by saying, he's the colleague who framed me and got me fired. You're the one. I see now. What are you discussing? Jennifer, who was fully aware of my termination, gave Joseph a disdainful glance. Joseph began to perspire profusely as he realized the woman he admired was aware of his transgressions. Everything you did, I know exactly what you did. My father has already been informed, and we are currently talking on how to handle it. I'm not sure what you're discussing. You are well aware of what you did to George. You won't get away with it from us. It appears that Reynolds Corporation undertaken an internal inquiry without informing me. They were investigating who put me up and why I was fired so abruptly. We've heard from several witnesses that you were envious of George. Who made that statement? I can't tell you that, but everyone will know what you really did very soon. Jennifer turned and walked away, her hair waving, after saying those words. I was unaware that an inquiry of this kind was underway. It's also unlikely that Joseph ever thought his misconduct would come to light. What should I do in the event that they discover my actions? They refer to this as karma. I believe I'll just observe from a distance as things unfolds. Please, come to my aid. Are we pals? I take it. After dropping Joseph off there, I followed Jennifer throughout the rest of the party. Joseph's eyes were expressionless. The reports of his wrongdoings had already begun to circulate, so even though some people were worried, nobody felt compelled to confront him. It was undoubtedly assumed by everybody that it would be the final time they saw him. And sure enough, Joseph got his notice of termination a few days after the party. It seems that they discovered that someone had overheard my talk with Joseph after questioning every employee. It was one of those quick-witted office gossips who was willing to testify. What was even more intriguing was that she had filmed a portion of our talk. Soon afterward, I learned through rumors what had happened to Joseph. Joseph evidently couldn't bring himself to notify his family that he'd been sacked. He'd dress up every day as though he was going to work, but all he did was kill time in the park until he got home in the evening. However, his wife quickly learned that he had been spotted in the park by a neighbor. Joseph acknowledged being fired when his wife confronted him, but he gave no explanation for the dismissal. She therefore learned the complete tale of how Joseph had set me up and gotten me dismissed when she got in touch with Reynolds Corporation. Of course, she was incensed. It was inexcusable for a man who was going to have his third kid to commit such a heinous act. With those remarks, she stormed out of the house. In addition to receiving divorce papers, Joseph is currently receiving criticism from his family members. His wife has engaged an attorney, so even though he hasn't signed the paperwork yet, it appears like the divorce will soon be finalized. Had he not chosen such a cowardly path, he may have received a promotion and enjoyed a happy life with his family. That's what I found myself thinking as I thought back on my experiences with Joseph. I was elevated to the position of head of the engineering department at Lawrence Corporation after 5 years of employment. It looks like my work was acknowledged. It turns out that Jennifer wasn't partial to me, despite my initial suspicions. My coworkers were the ones who suggested me for the role, stating that I would be a good fit. I'm positive that my sincerity with everyone I've dealt with has contributed to the way things have worked out. Well done. I'm overjoyed for you. Many thanks. All of it is due to you, Jennifer. It's just that your ability was acknowledged. We're having a celebration at a fancy restaurant tonight to honor my promotion to department head. Additionally, We're using this opportunity to discuss our future goals for our life. Actually, 3 years ago, Jennifer and I tied the knot. Since being married, we've both put in a lot of work and helped one another out. We chose to live as a couple since we realized that raising children at our age would be challenging. Despite our continued enjoyment of our jobs, we now find ourselves in a situation where we have more money than we know what to do with. So we agreed to talk about how to use it. I'd really like to take a trip, perhaps even across the globe. That sounds fantastic. When can we take a longer break? Let's go. Really? Are you for real? Yes, indeed. Jennifer smiled broadly at the idea of seeing the world. I never thought I would be fortunate enough to have a woman as amazing as mine. Though I was in terrible sorrow when Joseph betrayed me, that betrayal had the exact opposite effect on my life. Thus, in a way, I suppose I should be grateful to Joseph.
The call came during a board meeting. My phone vibrated against the conference table, drawing irritated glances from my colleagues. I normally silence it completely, but something made me keep it on vibrate that day. Maybe some part of me knew. I excused myself, heels clicking against marble as I stepped into the hallway. The caller ID showed Detective Morrison. My stomach dropped before I even answered. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Morrison with the Metro Police Department." I leaned against the wall, my free hand pressed flat against the cool surface. "Yes?" "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband Eric has been in an accident." The word accident hung in the air like smoke. I'd later learn how carefully chosen that word was, how much it concealed. "Is he—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to come down to Memorial Hospital. There are some questions we need to ask. I'm Penny, and that call shattered my carefully constructed world into jagged pieces that would never quite fit back together. The drive to the hospital exists in my memory as disconnected fragments, red lights bleeding into each other, the radio playing something upbeat and meaningless. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The emergency room reeked of disinfectant and despair. Detective Morrison met me at the entrance, a tall woman with tired eyes and a notebook that seemed to hold secrets she didn't want to share. "Your husband's car went off Highway 16 around noon," she said, leading me down a fluorescent-lit corridor. "The initial investigation suggests mechanical failure, but—" "But what?" She stopped walking. "The brake lines were cut, Mrs. Thompson." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Cut? You mean—" "We're treating this as a potential homicide." I remember laughing then, a harsh, broken sound that made a nearby nurse glance over in concern. "That's impossible. Eric was, just a businessman. Who would want to—" The detective's expression shifted slightly. "Mrs. Thompson, we've found some concerning documentation in your husband's car. Financial records, threatening emails. Does the name Marcus Blackwood mean anything to you?" I shook my head, but something clicked into place. All those late-night phone calls Eric had been taking lately, the way he'd been distracted and jumpy. "I need to see him," I said. "Mrs. Thompson." Her hesitation told me everything. "Please." She led me to a room where Eric lay covered by a sheet. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I noticed absurd details. His wedding ring catching the harsh hospital lights, a small cut above his left eyebrow that looked fresh, as if it might still be bleeding. "We'll need you to make a formal identification," Detective Morrison said softly. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead. Eric's mother Maggie would need to be told, and Cassie, his sister. My father would want to come over, despite his wheelchair making it difficult. But beneath all these practical thoughts, something darker was taking root. Someone had killed my husband. Someone had deliberately sent him off that road to his death. And in that sterile hospital room, standing over the body of the man I loved, I made a promise. I would find out who did this, and they would pay. My phone buzzed again. Maggie's name flashed on the screen. Of course she'd heard already. She always knew everything first. I let it ring, watching until the screen went dark. Some decisions change everything. Standing there, I chose not to answer that call, and that choice would set in motion events I couldn't possibly have predicted. Because sometimes the people closest to you are the ones holding the sharpest knives. Maggie's house loomed before me, all polished brick and manicured hedges. I sat in my car, watching shadows move behind the curtains. 3 missed calls from her already today. The 4th one would be in person. The front door opened before I could knock. Maggie stood there in a black designer dress, her face a masterpiece of controlled grief. "Finally," she said, pulling me inside. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where have you been?" The foyer smelled of lilies, Eric's favorite. Of course, she'd already ordered flowers. "I was at the hospital, Maggie. Then the police station." "The police?" Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat. "What are they saying about my boy?" I studied her face, searching for something genuine beneath the performance. "They're saying it wasn't an accident." Cassie appeared at the top of the stairs, mascara smeared beneath her eyes. For once, her expensive clothes looked rumpled, lived in. "What do you mean, not an accident?" "The brake lines were cut," I said, watching both their faces. Maggie's hand tightened on the banister. Cassie's eyes widened. "That's ridiculous," Maggie snapped. "Who would want to hurt Eric? He was beloved in the community. Unless—" She turned to me, eyes narrowing. "What have you done to protect my son's interests lately, Penny? All those late nights at the office. Were you even paying attention to what was happening?" "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me." "Mother," Cassie interrupted, descending the stairs. "This isn't helping." "No," Maggie's voice rose. "Then what would help, Cassandra? Because my son is dead, and someone needs to answer for that." She turned back to me. "We need access to the business accounts. Everything. Eric always said it was a family business." "Eric said a lot of things," I replied, "but legally, I'm his next of kin. And until we know what happened, everything stays locked down." "You can't do that." Maggie stepped closer, her carefully constructed facade cracking. "That business was built with Thompson money. Our money. You're just an outsider who Eric chose to marry," I cut in, "who he trusted with everything." "Did he?" Cassie asked quietly. Something in her tone made me turn. She was holding her phone, screen glowing in the dimness of the foyer. "Because I have some interesting emails here that suggest otherwise." My stomach clenched. "What emails?" "Eric was planning changes," Cassie said, glancing at her mother. "Big ones. Maybe that's why someone wanted him dead." "Show me," I demanded. "All in good time," Maggie interrupted. "Right now, we need to focus on arrangements. The funeral needs to be perfect. Eric deserves that much." "The police haven't released his body yet," I said. "They're still investigating." "Investigating what?" Cassie's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "What exactly did Eric tell you about his business dealings, Penny?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about the detective's words, Marcus Blackwood, the name I didn't recognize, but they clearly did, judging by the look that passed between mother and daughter. "I think," I said carefully, "that we all need to be very honest about what we know." "Honest?" Maggie laughed, a brittle sound. "My dear, you wouldn't know what to do with honesty if it slapped you in the face. Now, about those accounts." "No." I moved toward the door. "You'll hear from my lawyer." "Penny," Cassie called after me. "The emails, you should really see them." I paused, hand on the doorknob. "Send them to me." Outside, the evening air felt thick with unspoken threats. My phone buzzed. A text from Cassie. "There's more to this than you know. Meet me tomorrow, alone." I got in my car, watching the house in my rearview mirror. Maggie stood at the window, her silhouette rigid with fury. Beside her, Cassie raised her phone to her ear, speaking urgently to someone. The game had begun, and I was already several moves behind. But as I drove away, one thing became crystal clear. Someone in that house knew exactly why Eric died, and I was going to find out who. The emails arrived at 3 in the morning. My hands shook as I scrolled through them, Eric's words glowing accusingly in the darkness of our bedroom, our former bedroom. The deal with Blackwood is worse than we thought. If Mother finds out what we've done, I kept reading, each message revealing more layers of deception. Eric and Cassie had been working together, planning something big, something that terrified them both. My father's voice crackled through the phone. "Penny, it's nearly dawn. You should sleep." "Dad, I need your help understanding these financials." I switched to speaker, spreading papers across the bed. Eric was moving money around, lots of it, but the numbers don't add up. "You're good with numbers," he said. "Better than Eric ever was." "That's just it." I stared at a particularly suspicious transfer. "These aren't amateur mistakes. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." A knock at the door made me freeze. Through the peephole, I saw Cassie, mascara-stained and trembling. "I couldn't sleep," she said when I opened the door, "and there's something you need to see." She pulled out a USB drive, turning it over in her manicured hands. "Eric gave me this the day before the accident. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got it." "Why didn't you mention this at the house?" "Mother was watching." Cassie's voice cracked. "She's always watching." "Penny?" My father's voice came through the phone. "Who's there?" "It's Cassie," I said, studying her face. "Dad, I'll call you back." I plugged in the drive. Cassie paced behind me, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. Files populated the screen. Contracts, emails, photos. One folder was simply labeled MB. "Marcus Blackwood," Cassie whispered. "Mother's old friend, the one who helped start the company." The photos showed Eric and Blackwood in heated discussion outside a restaurant. The timestamp was 3 days before the accident. "Eric was going to expose him," Cassie said. "The whole operation. But Mother—" A car door slammed outside. Cassie rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain. "She's here. God, she followed me." Maggie Thompson strode up the walkway, her face set in lines of fury. I grabbed the USB drive, but Cassie caught my wrist. "Wait," she hissed. "There's something else you need to know. About the brake lines." The doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the tension like a knife. Cassie went rigid, her fingers digging into my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, she'll—" The doorbell rang again, followed by pounding. "Cassandra," Maggie's voice carried through the door. "I know you're in there, both of you." I moved toward the door, but Cassie blocked my path. "You don't understand. The company, the money, it's all built on lies. Eric found proof." "Found proof of what?" Tears streaked her makeup. "That Mother killed." The sound of a key in the lock silenced us both. I spun around as the door swung open, revealing Maggie with a spare key, Eric's key, in her hand. "Well," she said, her smile sharp as broken glass, "isn't this cozy? A little late-night conspiracy?" "How dare you use his key," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Oh, darling." Maggie stepped inside, her heels clicking like bullets on the floor. "Everything that was Eric's is family property now, including whatever my daughter just gave you." She held out her hand expectantly. Behind her, through the open door, I saw a man standing by a black car. Even in the darkness, I recognized him from the photos, Marcus Blackwood. Cassie saw him too. She made a small, frightened sound. "The drive," Maggie demanded. "Now." I clutched it tighter, feeling the edges dig into my palm. In that moment, I understood something terrible. This wasn't just about Eric's death anymore. This was about something much older, something buried deep in the Thompson family's past. And Maggie would do anything to keep it there. I slipped the USB drive into my boot while backing away from Maggie. "Get out of my house." "Your house?" She laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Everything here belongs to the Thompson family, including whatever secrets you think you've discovered." Blackwood appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room with something cold and calculating. "Margaret, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Eric left everything to me. The house, the business." "The business?" Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. My dear, you have no idea what you're involved in. Cassie moved between us, her hands trembling. Marcus, please. This isn't what Eric would have wanted. Eric, he said softly, made several unfortunate decisions near the end. Decisions that needed correction. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I reached for my phone, but Maggie was faster. Looking for this? She held up my cell phone. You really should be more careful about leaving things lying around. A text message flashed on the screen. From Detective Morrison. My stomach lurched as Maggie read it aloud. Found something in Eric's office. Meet tomorrow, 9 a.m. How interesting. She pocketed my phone. It seems we're not the only ones asking questions. Mother, Cassie whispered, don't do this. Do what, darling? Protect our family? Maggie's voice hardened. Like I protected you after that incident with the Martinez contract. Cassie went pale. You promised never to. Promises? I cut in. Like the promise Eric made about the Blackwood deal. Something shifted in Blackwood's expression. What exactly did Eric tell you? Enough. I moved toward the kitchen, where I kept a second phone hidden in a drawer. Enough to know why he was meeting with federal investigators the week before he died. Maggie's composure cracked. You're lying. Am I? Check the USB drive. I watched their faces carefully. Oh, wait, you can't. Because I already sent copies to my lawyer. It was a bluff, but it hit home. Blackwood grabbed Maggie's arm, whispering something urgent in her ear. Penny, Cassie said suddenly, the painting in Eric's office. Did you ever look behind it? Maggie slapped her. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. That's enough, I snapped, but Cassie was already laughing, a high, hysterical sound. You can't keep it hidden forever, she said, touching her reddened cheek. Eric found the real ledgers. He knew what you did to Dad. The room went silent. Maggie's face drained of color. What about your father? I asked carefully. Nothing, Maggie cut in. Cassandra is confused. Marcus, perhaps you should take her home. I'm not confused, Cassie said, her voice stronger now. Tell her, Mother. Tell her how Dad really died. Blackwood moved suddenly, but I was already running for the kitchen. I heard glass breaking, Cassie screaming, Maggie shouting orders. My fingers found the spare phone just as heavy footsteps approached. I texted Detective Morrison. Thompson House, now. Murder confession incoming. The kitchen door burst open. Blackwood stood there, his expensive suit incongruous with the violence in his eyes. The ledgers, he said quietly. Where are they? Where you'll never find them. Another bluff, but I was starting to piece it together. Eric's father's accident years ago, the company's sudden success afterward, Eric's desperate investigation in his final days. From the other room, I heard Cassie's voice, raw with years of buried truth. She killed him, Penny. She killed them both. Blackwood lunged forward just as police sirens wailed in the distance. In the chaos that followed, one thought crystallized with terrible clarity. Eric hadn't just been investigating fraud. He'd been unraveling a decades-old murder, and it had cost him everything. Now I had to finish what he started, or I'd be next. Detective Morrison's office felt like a cage. I paced while she reviewed the USB files, each click of her mouse marking another second we were exposed. Mrs. Thompson, she said finally, these records go back 20 years. Are you certain about Marcus Blackwood's involvement? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Liam. Third call today. I sent it to voicemail. Eric's father didn't die in an accident, I said. According to those files, Maggie and Blackwood orchestrated it. The company was failing, but the insurance payout saved it. And you believe they did the same to your husband? The door opened. Another detective entered, whispering something in Morrison's ear. Her expression darkened. Your father-in-law's case was ruled an accident, she said carefully. Reopening it would require substantial evidence. A familiar voice cut through the room. Liam stood in the doorway, holding a thick manila envelope. Like these? Morrison frowned. This is a closed meeting, Mr. Carter. I'm Mrs. Thompson's attorney now. He placed the envelope on the desk. And these are the original ledgers from the Thompson Company, the ones Eric found behind that painting. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. How did you— Eric contacted me the day before he died, Liam said quietly. He knew they were watching him. Asked me to keep these safe. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. You knew, all this time. Penny, don't. I backed away from both of them. You let me stumble around in the dark while you had proof. I was trying to protect you. Liam reached for my arm. If Blackwood knew you had these, like he knew Eric had them. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Did you tell them? Is that why they were ready for him that day? Morrison stood. Mrs. Thompson, if you're suggesting— My phone buzzed again. Cassie's text made my blood freeze. Mother knows about the ledgers. Dad's old cabin. Come alone or they'll hurt Robert. I have to go, I said, grabbing my purse. Penny, wait. Liam blocked the door. You can't trust Cassie. She's been working with them. How would you know that? I studied his face, seeing it clearly for the first time. Unless— He didn't deny it. Everything I did was to keep you safe. Safe? I laughed, the sound brittle and strange. My husband is dead. My father's being held hostage. And you've been playing both sides this whole time. Morrison moved toward her phone. I'm calling for backup. No. I pulled out my gun. Eric's gun, found in his office safe. No one calls anyone. Liam's eyes widened. Put that down. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. I backed toward the door. For the first time, I understand exactly what needs to be done. Penny, please. The ledgers stay here, I told Morrison. Evidence for both murders. But I'm going to that cabin. It's a trap, Liam said softly. Of course it is. I kept the gun steady. But unlike you, I don't abandon family. I left them there, Morrison reaching for her radio, Liam calling my name. The drive to the cabin stretched before me, dark and winding, like the path that had led to this moment. Eric had died trying to expose the truth. Now his mother was threatening my father, using him as bait, and Liam, the one person I thought I could trust, had been manipulating everything from the start. The gun felt heavy in my purse. I'd never fired one before, but as I drove toward the mountains, I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead brought a strange calm. I was ready to use it, because sometimes justice and revenge are the same thing. The cabin loomed ahead, a dark shape against the mountain sky. Dad's wheelchair tracks marked the gravel. They'd dragged him inside. My hands tightened on Eric's gun as I approached. Cassie opened the door before I knocked. You shouldn't have come. Where is he? She stepped aside, revealing the cabin's interior. Dad sat in his wheelchair by the fireplace, Maggie standing behind him. Blackwood lounged in an armchair, looking almost bored. Penny, Dad said, his voice steady despite the bruise darkening his cheek. You need to leave. No one's leaving, Maggie announced. Not until we sort this out like family. Family? I kept the gun hidden behind my purse. Is that what you call murdering your husband? Your son? Blackwood straightened. Careful, Mrs. Thompson. Accusations like that can be dangerous. Eric knew, I said, about the insurance fraud, the offshore accounts, everything. Eric was naive, Maggie snapped, just like his father, always wanting to do the right thing, never understanding what it takes to build something lasting. Movement caught my eye. Cassie inching toward a desk drawer. Don't, I warned, finally revealing the gun. Maggie laughed. Do you even know how to use that? Want to find out? Penny, Dad's voice carried a warning. This isn't you. No? I stepped closer to Maggie. Maybe it is now. Maybe this is what happens when you kill someone's husband and threaten their father. I didn't kill Eric, Maggie said softly, but I know who did. The cabin door creaked. Footsteps behind me. Hello, Penny. Liam's voice hit me like a physical blow. I spun, keeping the gun raised, but he already had his weapon trained on me. You followed me. I've been following you since Eric died, he said, making sure you didn't get too close to the truth. The truth? My laugh sounded hysterical even to my own ears. That you're working with them? Working with them? Liam shook his head. Penny, I own them. Who do you think Marcus Blackwood really works for? The room tilted. Memories flashed. Liam's convenient appearances, his careful guidance of my investigation, always steering me toward Maggie and away from... The rival business, I whispered. It was you all along. Eric found out, Cassie said quietly. That's why he contacted the FBI, but Liam got to him first. Shut up, Maggie hissed. No, Mother, I'm done lying. Cassie moved toward me. Eric was trying to protect us all, from him. Liam's smile turned cruel. And now history repeats itself. Another Thompson making the same mistake. The ledgers, I said. Detective Morrison has them. Detective Morrison works for me. He stepped closer. Everything works for me, Penny. That's what Eric never understood. That's what got him killed. Dad's wheelchair squeaked as he tried to move. Blackwood pressed him back. You loved me, I said, gun shaking. All those years pretending to be my friend. I did love you, still do. Liam's expression softened. That's why I'm giving you a choice. Put down the gun, sign over the company, walk away with your father, and live. Or join Eric. His weapon didn't waver. Your choice. Time seemed to freeze. Dad's eyes met mine, filled with a lifetime of lessons about right and wrong. Cassie stood trembling, her loyalty finally clear, but too late. Maggie watched with the desperate look of someone seeing their carefully built world crumble. And Liam, the man I'd trusted, who'd held me while I cried over Eric's death, waited for my surrender. I lowered the gun slowly. Smart girl, he said. Then everything happened at once. Dad threw himself forward, wheelchair crashing into Blackwood. Cassie screamed. A shot rang out, and I realized that sometimes the only way to end a nightmare is to wake up shooting. The gunshot echoed through the cabin. Liam staggered back, red blooming across his shoulder. My aim wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Dad's wheelchair had knocked Blackwood off balance, giving me the split second I needed. You stupid girl, Liam snarled, raising his weapon again. Cassie tackled him from behind. They crashed into the desk, sending papers flying. His gun skittered across the floor. The FBI is already coming, I said, keeping my weapon trained on him. The real FBI, not your corrupt agents. Liam laughed through gritted teeth. You're bluffing. Eric wasn't just gathering evidence against you. I moved closer, finger steady on the trigger. He was building a network, people ready to act if anything happened to him. Penny, Maggie's voice shook, he'll kill us all, like you killed your husband. I didn't take my eyes off Liam. Or did you just watch while he did it? Mother didn't know, Cassie said, backing away from Liam. Not about Dad. Not about Eric. Liam threatened to expose her fraud if she didn't help him take over the company. Blackwood lunged for Liam's fallen gun. Dad's cane cracked across his wrist. Stay down, Dad ordered, his teacher's voice cutting through the chaos. Both of you. Sirens wailed in the distance. Liam's face twisted into something inhuman. You have no idea what you've done, he spat. The people I work for will abandon you, I finished, just like you abandoned Eric when he begged for his life. His eyes widened. How did you... The cabin has security cameras. I nodded toward the corner. Eric installed them after someone broke in last year. They've been recording everything. Including your confession, Cassie added. Liam moved faster than I thought possible, producing a hidden blade. He grabbed Maggie, pressing steel against her throat. One last choice, Penny, he said. Let me walk out of here, or watch your mother-in-law die. Maggie trembled in his grip. Despite everything, despite her own crimes, I saw real fear in her eyes. Eric always said you were smart, Liam continued. Be smart now. Lower the gun. I did. Good girl. He backed toward the door, dragging Maggie with him. Maybe I did love you in my way. I loved you too, I said softly. That's why I'm sorry about this. The taser hit him from behind. Detective Morrison stood in the doorway, weapon raised. "Federal agents!" she shouted as her team swarmed in. "Everyone on the ground!" Liam collapsed, taking Maggie down with him. Blackwood tried to run, but didn't make it 2 steps. "You okay?" Morrison asked me later, as paramedics checked Dad's injuries. I watched them lead Liam away in handcuffs. He didn't look back. "Eric knew," I said. "He knew Liam would come after me next. That's why he left all those breadcrumbs, hoping I'd follow them to the truth." "And the security footage?" "Uploading to the FBI server as we speak." I turned to where Cassie sat with Maggie. They helped in the end. When it mattered, they'll still face charges for their role in the fraud. Good. I felt nothing but exhaustion now. Justice should be blind, right? Morrison smiled slightly. "Your husband would be proud." I thought of Eric, of his determination to expose the truth no matter the cost, of his faith that I would finish what he started. "The company," I said. "What happens to it now?" "That's up to you." She handed me a card. "When you're ready, we'll talk about rebuilding. The right way this time." Dawn was breaking as we left the cabin. Maggie and Cassie were led to separate cars, their futures uncertain, but their secrets finally exposed. Dad waited in the ambulance, strong despite everything. And somewhere, I hoped, Eric could rest, knowing his death hadn't been in vain. The gun felt heavy in the evidence bag. I'd never have to use it again, but its weight would stay with me. A reminder that sometimes justice requires more than just truth. It requires courage to pull the trigger. The courthouse steps felt colder than they should in summer. I watched Liam being led away in chains, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange. He didn't look back this time either. 10 to 20 years, Morrison said, joining me. Plus, whatever they add for Eric's murder once the forensics come back. I nodded, thinking of the security footage that sealed his fate. "And Maggie? 5 years, reduced for cooperation. Cassie gets probation." Morrison studied my face. "You okay with that?" Eric would be. I turned away from Liam's retreating figure. He always said Cassie was just trying to survive their mother. Inside the building, Dad waited with the company paperwork. The restructuring had been his idea, turning the Thompson business into a foundation for supporting whistleblowers and fraud victims. "Ready?" he asked as I approached. "Almost." I walked past him to where Cassie sat alone on a bench, her designer clothes replaced by something simpler, more honest. She looked up as I stopped before her. "I never thanked you for the cabin. You chose the right side in the end." "Did I?" She twisted her hands together. "Sometimes I think if I'd been braver sooner, Eric might still be alive. We all think that." I sat beside her, but Eric left us a way to make it right. I handed her the foundation paperwork. Her eyes widened as she read. "Co-director?" She shook her head. "Penny, I can't." Eric believed in second chances, in rebuilding things the right way. I stood. "Don't prove him wrong." Dad smiled as I rejoined him. "That was good of you. That was justice." I signed the final papers, feeling the weight of the past months lift slightly. Different from revenge, like you always said. The elevator dinged. Maggie emerged between 2 officers, headed for processing. Our eyes met briefly. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of her manipulations and masks. "I loved him," she said as they led her past. "In my way." "I know." I watched her go. "That's what makes it tragic." Outside again, Morrison handed me one last item. Eric's phone, finally released from evidence. "There's a video," she said quietly, "from the night before he died. You should watch it." Later, in Eric's office, my office now, I pressed play. His face filled the screen, tired but determined. "Penny, if you're seeing this, I failed. But I knew you'd finish it. You're stronger than all of them. Stronger than me." He paused, smiling that crooked smile I missed so much. "The company was never about money. It was about helping people, making things better. I know you'll do that. And Penny? Don't let what they did make you hard. Don't let my death become your prison. The screen went dark. Through the window, I could see the city stretching out, full of possibilities and pitfalls. The Foundation's first meeting was tomorrow. Cassie would be there, bringing her knowledge of the dark side of business. Dad would watch proudly as we built something new from the ashes of betrayal. My phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. They'd found more of Liam's victims, other companies he'd infiltrated and destroyed. The Foundation would help them too. I placed Eric's phone in the desk drawer, next to the gun I'd never fired again after that night. Both reminders, but of different choices. The office door opened. Dad rolled in with takeout bags. Thought you might be hungry. Always taking care of me. That's what family does. He set out the food. The real kind, not the kind that demands loyalty through fear. I joined him, thinking of Eric's words. Don't let my death become your prison. You know what else family does? I asked, grabbing a container. They build things together. Outside, the sunset on the Thompson building, its shadow stretching long across the city. Tomorrow, those shadows would begin to shrink, making way for something brighter, something better, just like Eric always wanted.
You're so broke you need welfare, huh? How are you doing?
At a certain party where we reunited, Howard addressed me mockingly. He doesn't know about my life after our divorce and seems to think I'm living in poverty while on welfare. But I was about to confront him with a surprising truth. Huh? Who are you confusing me with? Hearing this, Howard, unaware of my actual situation, began to scream in half madness. My name is Jenny Thompson. I am a 45-year-old housewife. My husband's name is Howard Thompson. He is a 50-year-old office worker who has now climbed the ranks to become the head of the family as a department head. Howard and I met through an arranged marriage. I had been married once when I was younger and became a widow after losing my husband early on. However, concerned about me still being young and living alone, my mother was the one who set up the arranged marriage. The prospective partner was a worker at the company where my mother worked, and given his good reputation within the company, I was persuaded to meet him, leading swiftly to our engagement. Although I was initially reluctant, I was naturally drawn to Howard's sincerity and humility, and eventually I accepted his marriage proposal.
Let's always visit your late husband's grave together on the anniversary of his death. Seeing your happy face will surely put him at ease.
I was deeply grateful to Howard for considering my feelings about my late husband. Our life together was truly happy for a while. However, it was around 6 months into our marriage when a significant turning point arrived. Dementia, you say? Having been consulted by Howard about his mother's odd behavior, I took her to a hospital in the city. Howard had work, and as a housewife, I was the only one available to accompany my mother-in-law, Susan, but the situation turned out to be worse than expected.
Moreover, it has progressed significantly. It would be dangerous for her to live alone in this condition.
Susan had been living alone and participating in weekly tennis. Recently, however, she has stopped attending, which worried her tennis friends. When they checked on her, they found her home to be very messy. She was lying down in the room, the air conditioner left running despite it being the middle of winter. Additionally, the stove was on, with a kettle heating, nearly leading to a catastrophic event. Howard had asked me to take his mother to the hospital together because something about the situation seemed off.
Dementia doesn't progress this suddenly. There must have been some symptoms before it reached this point. Weren't there any signs at all?
At that moment, a question crossed my mind. When we first had our arranged meeting, Howard had not brought his mother with him. Instead, her brother came, explaining she couldn't attend due to an important matter. Even when I visited their home to greet them, Howard was always bustling about, never letting his mother do any housework. I realized then that the reason their home had been well maintained was that Howard had been managing everything himself. I was attracted to him because he was family-oriented and took good care of his parents, but after our marriage, Howard left all the household responsibilities to me, never offering to help.
She's old, I didn't say anything, but you're still young. I'm supporting you as a housewife, so you should be able to handle the household tasks,
he told me, and I couldn't speak up about it. But if his mother had already been showing symptoms of dementia at that time, and he had been pushing himself just for that moment to hide it, was Howard a culprit by conviction, and was this whole situation part of his plan? That suspicion crossed my mind. The doctor must have suspected we were abusing Susan, which is why he worded it that way when he was asking about the signs and symptoms. It was natural to be suspected. After all, we had left his mother to live alone without proper care. I was furious at Howard for his indifference towards his parents. I couldn't just send Susan back to her home in her current state, so I decided to bring her back to our house temporarily. Fortunately, she was not aggressive or inflexible, and she easily agreed to stay at our house when I explained the situation. I couldn't take my eyes off her, nervously waiting for Howard's return while caring for her like a child. When Howard came home and saw his mother, he frowned.
Why did Mom come back with you? Didn't you send her home after the hospital?
Shocked by his atrocious attitude, I raised my voice at him. What kind of way is that to speak about your mother? She's your mother, isn't she? Aren't you worried?
I was worried, so I asked you to take her to the hospital, right? But I never asked you to bring her back with you.
I brought her back because she can't be left alone at your parents' home. Why are you complaining about that? Did you know about this already? At that moment, Howard paused, as if disturbed by my questioning. However, he quickly regained his composure, hung up his suit, and continued speaking lazily.
What are you talking about? If you have something to say it clearly.
Your mother has dementia, and it seems to have progressed quite a bit. Did you know about this already? Did you hide it and marry me knowing this? Howard, probably anticipating my accusation from my earlier remarks, snorted through his nose as if it were all absurd, and went to grab a can of beer while loosening his tie. In the midst of such a serious conversation, it was unacceptable to let him drink, so I took the can of beer from his hand.
What are you doing?
What am I doing? We're talking about your family. How could you even drink alcohol in such a situation like this? Despite Howard's shouting, I didn't hesitate and raised my voice back at him when his worried mother came to check on us. What's wrong, Jenny? I heard loud voices. I'm sorry, Susan. There was just a big bug that startled me. Don't worry, I'll get rid of it right away. As I compared Howard to a big bug with a hint of sarcasm, he must have caught the metaphor. He glared at me suspiciously and sat down at the dining table with a sigh. I led Susan to the living room sofa, turned on the TV to distract her from our conversation, and tried to keep her from hearing what was being said. Finally, seeing Howard ready to face the conversation, I felt irritation rising, but managed to suppress it and sat down across from him to start discussing our next steps. Honestly, if Susan's dementia has progressed that far, we should consider placing her in a facility.
Then you handle all that paperwork. I don't have time because of work. You're free all day, right? It shouldn't be a problem for you to take care of my mother.
Are you planning to leave everything about your own mother to me? First, we need to explain everything to her, right? We have to explain the dementia to her and get her consent for the facility. We can't just force her into it without letting her know.
What? You haven't even talked to her about it yet? What have you been doing all day? You had plenty of time to explain after the hospital before I got home. You're bad at organizing. You could have at least figured that out. I couldn't believe it. This man was so utterly hopeless. It was a moment of regret for my poor judgment. To think that someone could neglect their own mother to this extent was unimaginable. As I felt despair rather than anger at Howard's incredible nerve, he began to utter unbelievable words. I'm busy with work. I'm leaving all my mother's care to you, so just handle it. But don't you dare deduct anything from my salary for my mother's expenses. I don't want any unnecessary expenses. She's your own mother, isn't she? As I raised my voice at his incomprehensible words, his mother must have sensed something was wrong. Seeing her worried look peeking into the kitchen, I hurriedly reassured her with a smile. Howard must have seen this as a good opportunity. He left his mother's care to me and retreated to his room as if fleeing, locking himself in. Even when I tried to speak with Howard, he had locked the door, refusing to engage. I decided to wait until tomorrow to talk things over when he returned, but this turned out to be the beginning of a mistake. Unbelievably, Howard didn't return home for nearly a month. I tried calling him, but he had blocked my number, and when I asked about him at his company, they said he wasn't there, and they wouldn't tell me his whereabouts. At a loss, I was pondering what to do when a call came in from an unknown number. Hello? As I answered the phone, puzzled, it turned out to be Howard, with a lot of noisy sounds in the background. I called because I have something to tell you.
It's not just you who has something to say here. Where are you right now? I have things to talk about too. Why haven't you come home? What are you thinking, leaving your mother and everything else behind? As I raised my voice, Howard sighed wearily and said something shocking in an annoyed tone.
I'm tired of your nagging. I probably won't come back to that house again, so pack up my stuff. I'll proceed with our divorce through a lawyer.
Huh? What did you just say? His words left me in disbelief, and my mind froze. I couldn't grasp the meaning of what was suddenly said, and I felt overwhelmed by darkness.
I'm divorcing you. I'm sick of you nagging all the time. That's it. So pack up my stuff. See ya.
With those words, Howard cut off the call abruptly. Later, as he had said, a lawyer came to the house to proceed with the divorce. I resisted desperately, but the lawyer spoke mechanically, saying if I didn't agree to the divorce, they would take it to mediation, and he wouldn't negotiate further. Standing on the brink of despair, my mother-in-law looked at me anxiously. Jenny, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? If you're struggling, rest. I'll make some soup for you. Even with dementia, Susan's kind words almost made me cry. It was the same when we got married. Susan, who had raised Howard alone after losing her husband early, had told me she spent a long time on her own. Looking back, I think I should have relied more on those around me. Howard is kind and considerate, so he will surely support you. So, Jenny, make sure to rely on him a lot. You shouldn't bear it all alone. Remember the person who loved you. Always keep them in your heart. They're probably watching from heaven, and seeing you happy is their greatest joy. As I watched Susan sip her tea and smile cheerfully, tears flowed freely. She must have sensed my distress and reluctance to get married. She had understood everything and accepted me with generosity, leaving me only with words of gratitude. Looking back, I think Susan was thinking of Howard as a child at that time. Now that his kindness has become superficial, that memory has faded, and only the cherished memory of her dear child pursuing his interests remains. I heard that with dementia, only past memories remain vivid, and those words seemed to confirm it. As I cared for Susan, wondering what to do next, I felt worn down by the care and as if I was reaching my limit. If I had to endure such harassment every day, perhaps it would be easier to just divorce. Fortunately, I had a secret plan to help Susan. If Howard, who was being unreliable, was going to be responsible for my beloved mother-in-law, I would be the one to take care of her. I would protect her. With that vow in my heart, I decided to divorce Howard as he wished. 5 years later, I was at a certain reception party. Dressed in a gown, I was exchanging greetings with celebrities from various fields. It was then that I caught the eye of someone approaching, who grinned upon recognizing me.
You're so broke you need welfare, huh? How are you doing?
It was Howard, accompanied by an exceptionally beautiful woman. She was his current wife, her name being Katie, and he had demanded a divorce for me to marry her. What are you doing? I spoke as if I didn't know Howard was here, but actually I knew that he was going to be here already. I knew he had brought his wife here, that he had divorced me to marry his current wife, and that he had married me so that I would take care of his mother, who's a burden to him.
I came here because I got invited. What about you? Living on welfare and still struggling, so why are you here? Dressing up in fancy clothes? Trying to look rich.
He mocked my appearance with a laugh, implying that even a donkey would look fine dressed up. I was about to deliver a line that would astonish him. Huh? Who are you confusing me with? As I scoffed at Howard's remark, the surrounding people who heard him also chuckled. Confused, Howard and his wife looked at me and around them in a flustered state until the tycoon's son, who was Howard's wife's brother, Jack, approached me and greeted me.
Thank you very much for inviting us, ma'am. Ma'am?
Howard was shocked to hear this, and his wife also widened her eyes in surprise.
What? Did you really not know that this person is the CEO of Ross Company?
Jack looked at him coldly, glaring at him. Despite attending the reception party, he couldn't believe Howard had come without knowing who the CEO was. His look seemed to pierce Howard.
I hope my brother-in-law hasn't done anything disrespectful to you, ma'am.
With a meaningful tone, Howard's expression twisted. Surely the past issues of harassment, the divorce, and the matter of his mother were rushing through his mind. I watched this, smiling amiably, and responded that there was nothing to worry about. He's your brother-in-law? I didn't know that. We've had interactions before, so it's all fine. Howard and his wife were bewildered by my reply. Surely he, being her brother, thought I was just an ex-wife and the affair partner during our marriage. They thought this fact hadn't been revealed. Howard's wife started sweating profusely, but Howard and his wife's misconception was just that, a misunderstanding. As the reception was about to start, I was introduced as the host and stepped onto the stage to discuss the secret behind my business success and why I started this company. Among various questions, Jack raised his hand, and I called on him.
I heard that there was a particular catalyst that made you manage your current company. What was that catalyst?
As the audience also seemed curious, all eyes turned to me. I told them I had something to show and began playing a shocking video on the screen.
What is this?
The video showed Howard and his wife, and the unaware audience exchanged puzzled looks, wondering what was going on. These two are the reason I've climbed to where I am today. As I said this with a fresh smile, Howard seemed to realize what was happening. In a panic, he reached out and shouted,
"Stop it!"
while trying to rush onto the stage. However, I had anticipated this and had the male staff from my company restrain him. Thanks to them, the video continued to play, and murmurs spread through the party venue.
But it worked out well, right? I managed to divorce that woman and even dumped the demented old hag. Now, I'm finally free.
I was panicked at first. Taking care of a mother-in-law with dementia? No thanks. I'd rather die. Then you came up with that bold plan. I was really scared for you.
But it was a great idea, right? I married Jenny, dumped the old hag on her, and then got a divorce. As long as we pretended not to know about my mother's dementia, there was no problem. I was honestly scared when I heard she almost started a fire, but it's no longer my problem. Whether we're related by blood or not, I don't need a burden like her.
The audience was speechless at the video of Howard and his wife, laughing heartily at such inhumane remarks. Realizing the surrounding gazes, his wife panicked and Howard slumped down in despair. But I wasn't finished yet. I climbed to where I am today thanks to my ex-husband Howard Thompson and his current wife Katie. They deceived me, dumping my mother-in-law who has dementia to me and just abandoned us. He thought I was penniless and living on welfare because he had no interest in me. But before we married, I had already saved up $900 million. If he had been interested in his wife, he would have looked into that or asked, right? What do y'all think? Howard and his wife were shocked by my words, and Howard exclaimed,
$900 million?
I used to manage several companies and made tens of millions annually. Having earned enough for a lifetime, I retired early, and thanks to him, I didn't have to touch that money and lived a comfortable married life. When he met me, I was just a housewife, helping out with my family's business, so he suspected nothing. As I narrated this with a troubled laugh, the audience mocked them for their ignorance, and Howard and his wife were ridiculed. The only one silently watching all this was Jack, and Katie began begging him to do something, throwing a tantrum. But the next surprise came in an instant. This worthless ex-husband pushed everything onto me and dropped me to the lowest depths of life. But someone was there to help me. Light technician, please spotlight him. Without the spotlight that had been on me shifted unexpectedly to Jack. Seeing this, Katie was startled and frantically looked back and forth between me and her brother. This video is well shot, isn't it? It's actually a recording of their conversation. Who do you think filmed it? Then, at that moment, Katie's expression, who had thought her brother was her ally, shifted to one of utter despair. I'm sure the astute among you have realized by now. No one else around them could have filmed this. This means that this footage was taken by her brother, who has been collaborating with me. It's quite a valuable video. Upon hearing this, the color drained from Howard's face. It was clear now not only that his marriage was based on infidelity, but also that he hadn't expected me and his wife's brother to be in cahoots. As I started to explain why I had formed a cooperative relationship with him, Howard and his wife were rendered speechless. I placed my mother-in-law in a facility and started a new business to support her. During this time, I received a phone call. It was from him. He had found out about my ex-husband and his current wife's affair when they got married. This was because my ex-husband had boasted to a female colleague when he joined his company, and the story reached the president, her brother. Howard's indiscretion had led to this predicament. After learning the truth, he reached out to me out of concern. He offered to personally support my business and even became an investor. Now he's a good business partner. Why has he supported me so much? Because he too had been cheated on by his former wife and divorced as a result. As I shared this, the wife's brother clenched his fists as if to lay even his own grievances at Howard and his wife's feet. It's unforgivable to have such dishonorable people like them in my family. I'll do anything I can, so let me help you get your revenge. That was the essence of his call to me, and that's why we're here today. After laying out all the circumstances, I gave Howard and his wife a cold look, and the audience's chilly stares pierced the couple. In the entirely hostile atmosphere of the venue, Howard and his wife were clearly rattled. As I slowly approached the pair in front of the public, I delivered the final blow. I have no interest in ever associating with people like you again. I will protect my mother-in-law for the rest of my life. Please, never interfere with our family again. Staff, please escort these people out. Upon hearing this, Howard desperately reached out to me, trying to ingratiate himself as the staff moved to forcibly remove him. He resisted, but to no avail, and was dragged away struggling. Meanwhile, his wife, accompanied by female staff, quietly exited the venue. She did not resist, likely overwhelmed by the shocking revelations and the fear of her family finding out. In this way, I succeeded in settling a long-standing grudge, and my mother-in-law now lives comfortably in a facility. I make sure to visit her after work, and even though her dementia has progressed, she still remembers me, even if she forgets her own son. I want to continue watching you find happiness. Surrounded by those who likely believe my love was wrought miracles, I cherish the joy of remaining in her last memories. Besides me, Susan smiles peacefully, and I too look up at the sky, wishing for her long life. This has become our daily exchange. Since then, Howard and his wife have been disowned by their family, and Howard, having disgraced his company, was dismissed, albeit forcefully. It's natural for a company to fear losing credibility if it becomes known that someone they brought in as a son-in-law was such a person. I felt no sympathy for him, considering it was only right that he should take responsibility. Now, having lost their place, the two have fled to the countryside, struggling to survive day by day in a land where no one knows them. Though I still feel anger that hasn't been fully satisfied, seeing Susan smiling like this is enough for now. I will continue to look forward, protecting the important times with my work, love life, and family. That's how I live each day, cherishing every moment. Even if you receive welfare, you're still poor. With those words, the two left the house. I lost all my strength and slumped down, sitting weakly. I remembered what Phil had said earlier.
Sure, Ashley, you're independent, but I've always felt my pride as a man being hurt. From now on, I want to build a family with your sister, with Lindsay. So, please divorce me.
I felt like nothing mattered anymore, so I went ahead and signed the divorce papers to make it clear that I wanted out. After some time, I decided to discuss compensation with the two of them, with a lawyer present. Shamelessly, my sister, who's not even related by blood, demanded a share of the assets. However, the lawyer burst out laughing and said, "Aren't you the one on welfare?" What? My sister was surprised and shouted out loud because she didn't see it coming. Right after that, when the lawyer placed the documents on the table, my sister's face turned pale. My name is Ashley Reed. My husband Phil and I have been married for 18 years. I am 45 years old, and Phil is 3 years younger at 42. We have a daughter, Rita, who is 17 years old and currently a high school sophomore. She's going to be taking those crucial exams next year to get into college. Phil and I met through work. I was working at a real estate company and Phil was working at a related company. We hit it off over something trivial and started going out privately frequently. Phil has a very delicate personality and often finds it hard to make decisions decisively. Back then, I found his indecisive nature cute and was attracted to him. I wanted to take care of him in various ways. I genuinely felt that way. Also, I have a younger brother who is much younger than me. Initially, I was looking after Phil, projecting my brother onto him, but gradually I became attracted to his manly qualities, and we seriously started dating and got married. Usually indecisive, Phil took the initiative for both the confession and the proposal. In situations that needed decisions, he made them decisively. That gap made me feel that I could safely marry him. Then we had Rita without ever having a serious argument or a marital crisis. Once Rita became an adult, we planned to start a second life as a couple. Well, that's what I thought. "Hey, Ashley, can I stay here for a bit?" Saying that, my sister Lindsay, who had come for an unannounced visit, pulling a large suitcase, arrived. I have a sister besides my brother, and that's the sister standing in front of me. Maybe because of the age difference, I get along well with my brother. However, my sister, who is close in age to me, and I have always had a difficult relationship. Being shorter than my sister, I always ended up with her hand-me-downs. Feeling sorry for me, our parents would buy me a new toy. "Wow, nice. Give me one too." Saying that, my sister snatched the new doll I had received and pushed her worn-out, broken doll onto me. Her outrageous behavior did not stop there. As cute as taking things might be, it was still bearable. When we started elementary school, she stole all the friends I was close to, and when I got my first boyfriend in high school, she seduced him away from me. Even though I went to different schools to get away from her, she still butted in, and I couldn't have a good time in college. I still don't really like my sister. If possible, I want nothing to do with her. So I studied hard, obtained my real estate license, moved to LA, and lived a life without seeing my sister. Phil and I decided to have a photo wedding just for the two of us. Knowing my sister's personality, my parents kept my marriage a secret. Yet she found out I was here. I was hoping that once Rita started university, I would have some time for myself and my husband. "Huh? Ashley, you live in a pretty nice house for your taste. Is it a detached house? Oh, there's a room available here. I'll use this one." My sister's shrill scream snapped me back to reality. "Hey, you can't just come out of the blue like this. Why are you even here? There's no way you can stay when my husband and daughter are living here too, right?" Ignoring my words, my sister started looking around the house. Today is a holiday, but Rita is out attending a summer course. Phil had also been out since morning due to work. "Could you please leave before the two of them come back?" I asked her repeatedly, but my sister did not listen. Finally, in the evening, the two of them returned home.
Who might you be?"
Phil looked puzzled, but my sister greeted him with such charm that you wouldn't guess she's 46. "Nice to meet you. I'm Ashley's sister, Lindsay. When did you marry her? I had no idea because there was no greeting or announcement about your wedding. I was bored, so I went to visit our mom's house and I found a photo from your wedding in her room. She's so secretive, even though we're sisters." Phil knew I had a sister, so I think he saw her the way I told him, and he seemed a bit concerned, but I definitely noticed it. Phil checking out my gorgeous sister. Rita also returned home with a puzzled look on her face. It's only natural she'd have that look on her face. Suddenly, an aunt she had never met before had barged into our house. But my sister was super determined to talk about us living together. "Ashley, I got fired, and it's tough to manage the rent and living expenses, so I'd like to stay here for a bit."
"Well, if it's just for a little while, why not?"
"What? Not right now. Rita has important exams next year." I was about to say that, but the two of them didn't listen to me and were getting excited on their own.
"Actually, I've heard about you from Ashley."
It's fine. Ashley was avoiding me, so you just went along with what she described about me, right? I'm sorry my sister said those things about me to you." Since then, it's been non-stop chaos every day. My sister didn't do any housework, but kept asking for money, and eventually she even started stealing cash from my wallet. This happened just 1 week after my sister moved in. I had repeatedly warned her about this, but she did not listen. "Hey, if you need money, at least tell me what you're buying or why you need it. Don't just take it from my wallet." "Huh? Why should I report to you what I'm buying?" "Because it's my money." Since she was fired, I wished she would job hunt and quickly move out. However, it didn't seem like she was job hunting. Recently, the times Phil and Lindsay were out seemed to overlap. Phil had said he was working overtime, but there was never any overtime pay included in his salary. I complained about this. "Your salary doesn't include overtime pay, right? Then you must properly receive overtime pay. If you can't say it, shall I say it for you?
What? Are you doubting me? I do receive the overtime pay separately, so there's no problem.
Usually gentle, Phil had never raised his voice before. This was enough of a shock for me. Because Phil was not someone who would suddenly shout or blame emotionally. From this point, I started to feel a crisis in our current life. My sister continued to lounge around at home, costing us more and more money. She was consuming more than my daughter Rita, and I could only sigh. I discussed this with our parents. They apologized for their lack of oversight, which led to my sister finding out about my marriage and current home. But it was not our parents' fault. I had been living quietly away from my dear parents, with my husband and daughter, yet my sister was obsessed enough to track me down. She must have been preparing to find out where I lived when she found our wedding photo. Surely even now she is planning to take my things and make me unhappy. I started to doubt whether Lindsay really got fired from her job. Maybe she quit on purpose to disrupt my life. It even began to seem like a possibility. If that was the case, I needed to kick her out of the house as soon as possible. You said you got fired, but if you were enrolled in employment insurance, wouldn't you be eligible for unemployment benefits? I've always been part-time, so I wasn't enrolled in that kind of stuff. That's why I'm struggling. I could have gone back to our parents' house, but I can't just make my elderly parents take care of me, right? So as an independent adult, it's your responsibility as a sister to take care of me. That's common sense. I was at a loss for words to her nonsensical response. After dropping out of university, Lindsay had always worked part-time and apparently never had a full-time job. Being confronted with this fact later, I felt it was no wonder her job hunting wasn't going well. 3 months after Lindsay started staying with us, I finally caught her and Phil in the act of cheating. I had suspected it before, but now it was confirmed. One day when a client canceled a meeting, I went to a cafe to pass the time and saw Lindsay and Phil walking together outside. They were holding hands and chatting happily. It's unthinkable for just a brother-in-law and sister-in-law to be holding hands. At that moment, I was certain they were having an affair. After a while, when I had made up my mind, I confronted them at home. So the overtime was a lie after all. Lindsay, you've just been pretending to job hunt while hanging out with Phil. Ugh, the worst. Even at this age, you can't be satisfied without taking something from me? That's why I've always kept the fact that I was married from you. Exploding with emotion as I spoke my mind forcefully, the two of them readily admitted to their affair. Then they started saying things that were even more upsetting.
If I had known such a beautiful person was your sister, I wouldn't have been misled by you to avoid Lindsay. Ashley, you're indeed independent, but I've always felt like my pride as a man was being hurt. From now on, I want to build a family with your sister, with Lindsay. So please, divorce me.
He then presented me with a divorce paper that was already filled out in his section. Understood. There's no way to rebuild this anymore. Lindsay, Phil, from now on, I won't be looking after any of your financial needs, so just know that. After I said that, Lindsay burst out laughing and said this. Even if you receive welfare, you're still poor. What? Wondering what she was talking about, a half-smiling Phil began to say even more absurd things.
Right. Since custody usually favors the mother, I think it's better for Ashley to be with our daughter. Just do as you like from here.
With those words, the two of them left the house. A few minutes later, Rita came home and was puzzled by how quiet the house had become, so I honestly told her that we were getting a divorce. Initially shocked, Rita seemed somewhat relieved to accept the situation. Sometime later, the divorce was finalized. I decided to discuss compensation with them with a lawyer present. Shamelessly, Lindsay demanded a share of the assets. However, the lawyer burst out laughing and said, Aren't you the one on welfare? What? Caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, my sister made a startled outcry. Right after that, my sister turned pale when she saw the documents the lawyer had placed on the table.
There isn't enough money between this couple to divide any assets.
Shocked by those words, Lindsay looked back and forth between Phil and me. Of course, Phil was also surprised to hear that we almost had no assets. Anticipating this, I had taken certain actions right after witnessing Phil and Lindsay cheating. Therefore, between us, the couple, we only had a mere $12,000 in cash. For a couple that had been married for 18 years, this was hardly a believable amount.
Hey, what's going on? You had a lot of savings, didn't you?
Phil, completely unable to grasp what was happening, asked this in a panic. Watching him, I felt anger well up inside me. You really have no interest in Rita at all. Didn't we talk about this? I've been saving up for her education, but I thought I'd transfer it to her account now. You said to do as I like, so I transferred the money I had saved to Rita's account. Almost all of my savings are for education. You know this better than anyone, right? Rita is managing her money herself, and I even paid the gift tax to transfer it to her, so this is no longer considered a couple's savings. I mentioned it with a calm face, and Phil's complexion started to pale as he remembered the conversation.
So, what makes up the $12,000?
About 80% of it is what I think Phil has been hiding. At this, Phil looked at me as if wondering how I knew.
You knew about it, and that's why you transferred your savings to Rita, considering the division of assets?
You agreed to it. Remember, you signed the consent form yourself. With that, Phil became angry.
I thought it was strange. Why would you ask for my agreement just to do that?
Phil was visibly regretful as he scratched his head, but since he had signed it himself, he couldn't claim it back now. The lawyer had confirmed that since Phil had consented to the gift to Rita, it was no longer considered marital savings at that point. I didn't want the money I had been saving for Rita all this time to go to these two. That's why it considered a living trust. Hearing this, Lindsay looked stunned, but somehow managed to say to Phil,
Hey, you said we had plenty of savings. Weren't we supposed to live a luxurious life together? Dividing $12,000 won't amount to much, will it? Why didn't you realize Ashley's intentions sooner?
While turning pale, Lindsay blamed Phil, but Phil just looked away and kept silent. Phil had been earning little and had a lot of student loans, so he hadn't contributed much to living expenses for a while after we got married. However, this was under agreement. When Phil had discussed the difficulty of contributing to the living expenses, I had said, Understood. I'll handle all the living expenses, so could you please focus on saving as much money as possible for our retirement? That's why I had been covering all the living expenses for many years. I thought Phil had been able to save at least $1,000 a month, but when it came down to it, it was less than $10,000. He didn't have to pay living expenses, so saving should have been easy, but Phil had been wastefully spending without my knowledge. That must be it. I had accidentally seen his bank book left on his desk and discovered the savings amount, feeling betrayed. But perhaps he had been saving properly in another account. That faint hope was also betrayed, but now that we were divorced, it didn't matter anymore. Lindsay was finally understanding the gravity of the situation and was visibly shaken, desperately trying to think of what to do next, but apparently coming up with nothing. Knowing that the cash available for division was only $12,000 and seeing Lindsay confused, I decided to tell her more of the truth. I looked at Phil and said, I debated whether to say this, but Phil, you're planning to quit your job, aren't you? Then Phil, who had been avoiding eye contact and keeping silent, suddenly met my gaze. Visibly flustered, Phil moved his eyes left and right as he shouted,
How do you know I'm planning to quit my job? I haven't told anyone but the boss yet.
I thought so when I saw the details. What I pointed out was the fact that no overtime pay was being paid, but I had actually been wondering about a particular section. It was about the use of paid leave. Phil had quit a job related to real estate before and was now working for a construction company, but I had never seen him take more than the minimum 5 days of paid leave. Yet recently I noticed in the payroll statements that Phil's paid leave was being consumed all at once. When you think of using up paid leave all at once, resignation comes to mind. And since then, I had been suspecting their affair, wondering if Phil had decided to quit his job thinking he would get a substantial fortune after divorcing me. I couldn't help but sigh at Phil's overly optimistic thinking that this might actually happen. Well, you were my husband after all, so you should know what kind of work I do and how much wealth I've accumulated. To think you cheat and even choose to quit your job based on that? You really don't think ahead, do you? As I said this, Phil's face turned red. The lawyer's remark to Lindsay about being on welfare meant that the two of them being unemployed together would end up in that situation unless they worked. Lindsay seemed panicked by this further truth, but then she seemed to realize something and exclaimed,
Wait a minute. If you alone can cover Rita's college expenses and living costs, there must be something fishy going on. Got it. You're hiding assets, aren't you? That must be it. Come on, confess already.
Hearing my sister's words, Phil seemed to have a realization as well.
That's right, Lindsay. Actually, Ashley owns a lot of real estate, and we need to divide that as assets. Close call. Almost got tricked. Real estate is a significant asset, and we need to split it evenly between us. You've been acting all high and mighty, but you're being sneaky and cheap too.
Watching the two of them laugh about this, I was dumbfounded. Eventually, the lawyer couldn't hold back a chuckle. At that moment, the tension in the air tightened. The lawyer cleared her throat and began to explain the facts calmly.
If we're going to talk about dividing assets, perhaps you should study up first. Phil, as the former husband, you might know this, but Ashley owns the real estate through her company, which is making a profit. A corporation and an individual are separate entities. Ashley's company is her separate property, and it cannot be divided as marital assets.
Convinced by the professional's explanation, the two turned bright red and froze. The lawyer continued.
As for assets that can be considered, typical ones include cars, houses, and cash savings. Furthermore, Phil and Lindsay have practically admitted to the affair. Therefore, Ashley can demand compensation from you two. Let's say $10,000 from Phil and $3,000 from Lindsay.
At those words, their faces contorted.
What? Isn't that high? It was just a few months' relationship.
Yeah. Hey, isn't this normally not even close to $10,000?
The two began making excuses, apparently not expecting this turn of events. However, I promptly rebutted. Oh, who decided that? Market rate is just a guide. Phil, you took paid leave to secretly date my sister, and Lindsay, you didn't even seriously look for a job, but just spent my money frolicking around. The lawyer objectively assessed these facts and settled on these amounts. What? Would you have preferred a higher amount? With that, the two hastily shook their heads. The discussion didn't conclude that day and was adjourned, but I felt a firm reassurance about the situation. 2 weeks later, we met again to discuss. Strangely, Lindsay adopted a defiant attitude and said,
Give me the house and the standard car. Is that what you call compensation like asset division? Then give Phil $12,000 and I'll pay the remaining $1,000 with that, okay?
Her ludicrous statement almost drove me to shout in anger, but I managed to control myself with reason and slowly sorted out the situation. There was still a mortgage on the house, and I had maintained it whenever necessary, so it would probably fetch a decent price if sold. The car, too, was still relatively new, having been bought only 5 years ago. Accepting my sister's terms would mean a loss for me, which I absolutely did not want. Lindsay, did you even do the math? If you consider the money from selling the house and car, you wouldn't say such things, right? Normally, those kinds of discussions aren't for the cheating party like you and Phil to initiate. It's for me to bring up. I couldn't believe how brazen they were. Before I could continue, Phil, sitting next to Lindsay, interrupted with this.
You own assets worth $170 million through your company, right? I don't care if they call you the queen of real estate or whatever, but being so stingy with money despite having such wealth is just too crazy.
Stunned for a moment, I ended up laughing out loud at their ridiculous claims. Given the situation, my sudden laughter froze them. After a good laugh, I returned to a serious expression. So that's all you wanted to say? And why are you playing the victim? Greedy? I'm fine being called greedy. I'd rather keep the money for Rita than give it to a man who would abandon his daughter and a terrible sister who would steal her brother-in-law. They both flinched. As the lawyer said during the previous discussion, if you want to use legal terms, you really should study more. What made them think they could say such a thing? I decided to slowly dismantle their plans. Phil, the house is registered in my name, right?
I know that, but we've been living together all this time.
So what? I bought it on a mortgage before we got married, so no matter what, it remains my separate property. The car was bought new. It's accident-free and violation-free, and this model sells for a good price, so if you want to take it, you need to pay me half the appraisal value. That's the rule for property division. We own 2 cars. One is a new car we've been discussing. The other is a used compact car, which probably won't fetch much.
But the lawyer said that houses and cars are subject to property division.
Without thinking, my sister took those words at face value. However, that's not what it meant. Look, The lawyer was just telling the main items that could be included in property division, not saying they would definitely be included this time. What we need to divide between us is just a combined $12,000 from Phil's hidden savings and my savings, plus the 2 cars. That's all. Unaware of this, and with Phil not having thought deeply about it, they found themselves in a bind again. Phil seemed to ponder over various things, but eventually, not knowing what to do, he pleaded with me.
So, could you just give me enough money to start a new life, please?
But he didn't seem remorseful. It just seemed like he was apologizing to solve the problem at hand. I don't need such a shallow apology. I hardened my heart and responded. Given how you are, it seems like you wouldn't want to pay child support for Rita either. So there's no room for compromise, is there? Why should I worry about your living expenses? After I firmly stated this, they realized that no matter what they said, I wouldn't budge, and they reluctantly signed the relevant documents. Sometime after the divorce and the division of assets were settled, I kept getting calls from my sister.
Hey, why did Phil have so much debt? You were paying the living expenses, right? Then what was the point of getting into debt? What's going on?
She was screaming over the phone. While holding back a sigh, I calmly explained the facts. It's obvious, isn't it? The fact that he had less than $10,000 saved up, despite having years to do so, should have told you everything. Does it mean he was making big purchases or had set up car loans? Something like that? When I asked in exasperation, my sister desperately explained her current situation.
Yes, exactly. He took out loans worth several thousands just to pay meaningless luxury brands. And then the credit card payments turned into a nightmare because they were set to revolving credit without knowing. When we looked into it, this guy was just a dangerous debtor. How could you saddle me with such a person?
Well, you didn't get saddled with him. You stole him from me. I retorted with a half smile, and my sister fell silent. It seems Phil has been incurring debts even without my knowledge. Now I'm getting several collection letters. He had hidden it while we were together, but probably let his guard down after changing addresses. Or, maybe being Phil, he got too caught up in his new life and forgot to hide it. Oh, there's one more thing I didn't tell you, Lindsay.
Oh, what now?
She was completely terrified, but I had remembered something upon hearing about the debts. Phil mentioned he was in construction, but it's really just his own one-man show. There, they withhold income tax and resident tax, but he needs to manage all other necessary payments himself. I run my own business, so I handle national pension and national health insurance myself, and when Phil quit his job in real estate, I also switched Rita to national health insurance to manage it. I have been handling my own resident tax and other matters, but it turned out that Phil had not been paying his national pension since a year ago when he changed jobs. I was handling the national health insurance payments, so that was not an issue. Due to some mistake, we received a dunning letter for the national pension at our house. I contacted Phil to get permission to open it, and it turned out to be a dunning letter. It seems he had been hiding it all along because I had no idea. I pay my own national pension, and I assumed Phil was paying his too. When I called Phil to ask if I could open the dunning letter, he begged for help, almost in tears.
National pension costs this much? No way, man. I can't pay this. We were a family, weren't we? Help me out, will ya?
Huh? What are you talking about? Are those the words of the very person who abandoned his wife and child? Once again, my logic left Phil speechless. Talking about this made him realize there was no hope, and it seemed like my sister, on the other end of the phone, had also lost her words out of despair. That's the situation, so you'll have to figure it out yourselves. With that, I hung up the phone. Eventually, Phil called back, complaining about the high taxes on the car he took and that he hadn't expected the vehicle inspection to be so costly.
Man, maintaining a car costs this much? I was shocked. I thought the taxes would be a few $10, but it was in the hundreds. And the car inspection costs this much too? It's tough, huh? Won't you take it back?
No. After my brief response, Phil hung up, disappointed. Subsequently, he sent emails begging for help, but when I warned him, if you keep this up, I'll consider it stalking and consult the police, he stopped immediately. From now on, an even tougher hell awaits the two of them. Later, it seems that Phil and Lindsay got divorced. Their marriage lasted only 3 months after he divorced me. The plan probably went awry when they realized the single-family home registered in my name was not subject to property division. Getting married while carrying debts and compensation in the tens of thousands was never going to work out. Moreover, it seems their post-divorce squabbles were even worse than when he was with me. Lindsay is someone who clings to money.
Sell the new car. Keeping it is a waste. Better to turn it into cash, right?
What? The small change doesn't matter. Besides, I paid all of your compensation, so if we're divorcing, give me that money back.
Such trivial quarrels apparently delayed their divorce. Eventually, they did divorce, but Phil seems to have chosen the path of bankruptcy. Since I had already collected the lump sum compensation payment, it didn't affect me. However, now Phil was unemployed, penniless, and ultimately became homeless. Of course, having said he would quit his job, he couldn't take back his words and left the company. His unnecessary pride prevented him from applying for welfare. Now he's probably living a miserable life, begging like a beggar. Divine retribution has struck Lindsay. Despite stealing her sister's husband and cheating, she was divorced after only 3 months, a fact that became well known around her, ruining her social relationships. Naturally, her family and relatives disowned her. Also, no company would want to hire someone like my sister, so her job search remains difficult. Even if she gets hired for a part-time job, her terrible attitude of never being wrong leads to her being fired in an instant. The lawyer's words about being eligible for welfare became reality, and now Lindsay is persistently at the welfare office trying to get support. However, because she continues to hold on to any potentially valuable personal belongings, she hasn't been able to receive welfare and got kicked out of her apartment, ending up homeless like Phil. Since she trampled on my and Rita's feelings with her selfish actions, this punishment seems only fair. Now it's just the two of us living, and our days are unremarkably peaceful. Rita, who used to receive nothing but complaints about studying and going to a good university from Phil, says she felt relieved after he was gone. And she brilliantly passed her exams and got into a national university. Watching my daughter start university this spring, I am once again moved. My work is busily rewarding, and although I'll soon be 46, I am still healthy. I think to myself that I must keep going even harder.